the rudder! Raise the sails! Raise the sails!
Captain, an unidentified ship is approaching. Over.
Roger. Wait, is that an Enterprise sales solution?
Reach sales professionals, not professional sailors. With LinkedIn ads, you can target the right people by industry, job title, and more. Start converting your B2B audience today. Spend $250 on your first campaign and get a free $250 credit for the next one. Get started today at linkedin.com/campaign. Terms and conditions apply.
The family that vacations together stays together. At least that was the plan. Except now the dastardly desk clerk is saying he can't confirm your connecting rooms.
Wait, what?
That's right, ma'am. You have rooms 201 and 709.
No, we cannot be 5 floors away from our kids.
The doors have double locks. They'll be fine.
When you want connecting rooms confirmed before you arrive, it matters where you stay.
Welcome to Hilton. I see your connecting rooms are already confirmed.
Hilton, for this day.
This episode is brought to you by Nespresso and Samra Origins by the Weekend Coffee Collection.
Introducing Samra Origins. My collaboration with Nespresso is a connection to my roots, to my mother, Samra. Coffee that hits the right notes. It transports you. Crafted with unique notes and bold, soaring flavors. Experience a taste that moves you. Nespresso and Samra Origins.
Discover more at Nespresso.com.
Hello everyone and welcome to Howie the Podcast, the official podcast of Roker Report. I'm Gav and you join us on this fine Sunday morning after the dust has settled following Sunderland's heavy 3-0 defeat at the hands of Coventry City. We can't avoid talking about it, of course, and I'll have to grab the thoughts of the two men joining me today on what to think about Sunderland's performance, but we'll try and avoid it as much as we can. But we're hoping to look ahead slightly today at what is to come between now and the end of the season. First off, joining me is my old mucker, Martin Wanless. Hello, mate.
Hi, mate. I've almost managed to forget about the 3-0 defeat to Coventry, but it's it was a pretty devastating blow, really, wasn't it? I didn't see it coming at all. I know you and Chris dissected it after the game, and if anybody wants to listen to a deep dissection of it, it's there and ready for them, isn't it? But yeah, I didn't see that coming, I have to say. I think
calling it a dissection is possibly playing it up a bit. We just whinged for half an hour. But yeah, wasn't particularly great. We'll get into Coventry though. Also with us today, a very special guest who makes his first appearance on the new show, but is someone our long-time listeners have become fondly acquainted with over the years. He played 40 games for Sunderland, scoring 7 goals. If my reading of StatCat this morning very quickly was correct, in a 3-year-ish spell at Sunderland, joined by the one and only Kieron Brady. Good morning, Kieron.
Good morning, Gav. Good morning, Martin.
Hello, mate.
I seen you rolling your eyes a bit there. Are those stats correct? Are we going to have to file a complaint with StatCat?
Yes. I wasn't a beneficiary of the game being spoken about in minutes and assists, so it tends to revolve exclusively around games and goals. And I think my career would even be remembered more favourably and fondly if we factored in minutes and assists. But there you go. That's one of the things about the modern game I do find agreeable.
You said you normally sat on your cross trainer on a Sunday morning, so we've dragged you into this mess to talk about Sunday.
No, You've done me a favour in one sense, Gab, because ahead of coming on today, I decided I would do the longer cross-training session that I do, which is an hour and 10 minutes, and I've done that yesterday morning. So I tried to make sure that what we're doing now was given as much concentration as possible, and then obviously the punctuality aspect was what let me down. So, but
yeah.
Here I am.
Just to let people in behind the curtain, you slept in, Kieron, didn't you? Unfortunately.
I did, and then we had to encounter technical gremlins, so we're here now.
We're here now.
We are here now. Yes. We'll start, I think, by just talking about Coventry very briefly. I'll grab your thoughts on it. Did you get to watch the game, Kieron, or not?
I did. I mean, I would try to watch as many games as possible, but by about 3:30, I was perhaps reconsidering my desire to, because I think from the very outset, it was very clear that one side wanted it more than others. And I know that's something of a cliche in football, and it isn't intended to imply that the team who invariably ends up losing isn't putting any effort in, but it was very visible that Coventry's tempo, their desire, their conviction, their authority was evidently more than what we were seeing from Sunderland. And of course, what tends to happen is when that materialises, that, you know, it tends to result in defeat.
What does that say to the players? And, you know, is that about the worst accusation you can level at a team, that they just didn't try as much as the other team? Because it's not something we've said much about Sunderland this season. I think you know, mentally the effort was there. I think you know, you would always say to a player, you want to win this game of football. They're never going to a game not wanting to win. But you're very right. Coventry definitely wanted that more than we did, and that's probably the most worrying thing for me.
Well, I mean, I don't have any designs or desires to be a manager or a coach, but what I do know is that players tend to be very, very reluctant, and it would be felt to be a show of weakness if they were at any point, particularly on the day of a game, to say that they just weren't feeling it, or perhaps that something was going on in their personal or private life that could potentially detract from their performance. But whatever the reasons were, whatever the circumstances, there's no doubt, you know, and it was very visible, you know, and the statistics might show that the Sunderland players against their direct opponent ran as much or perhaps put as many tackles in, but there's certain things that statistics can't measure, certainly not yet, or not that I'm aware of. And you know, like the Coventry, even if the difference over 90 minutes was that one player up against another ran an extra 10 metres, you know, those 10 metres were made up of little half yards here and, you know, 3 feet here. And it was coming with, you know, you could almost sense the facial expressions at times of the Coventry players being much more intense and much more desiring than that of their Sunderland counterpart. And, you know, for any players that maybe started with a much more positive approach, if they see their teammates maybe not quite at it and not doing things in the manner that they're accustomed to seeing from them, then it can particularly with younger players, you can't really expect maybe a younger player alongside you to maybe sort of pull you up, as it were. So it just tended to be, you know, the one event after the other in that particular regard. And of course, Sunderland created some openings with Mayenda's, like the little interplay between Mayenda and Mundle in the first half, and then of course with chances in the second half with Mayenda and with Isidore within a couple of minutes. But I suppose that was symptomatic of the day. And there's no doubt whatsoever that the better team won. And Haji Wright, even out with the hat-trick, was causing all kinds of problems to O'Nien and Mayhem in particular.
Yeah, it was a bit of a mess, Martin, wasn't it? I think Kieron's really got it right there. You know, we went through the motions. We looked slow and tired. 3 poor goals to concede. It was about as flat and bad a performance as I've seen in a long time. I mean, definitely the worst performance of the season. And that, for me, just... like I said before, I don't like to accuse the players of a lack of effort or desire, but that's possibly the first time this season where I think if you said it, it's fair enough, isn't it?
No, that's right. I think it's funny, isn't it? Because like the first 5 or 10 minutes, I was kind of thinking this is almost a regular away performance. How we start, we kind of start slow, let the game settle down a bit, try to suss the opposition out. But when you looked at it, Coventry played like a team who had been on a good run, that had a setback in midweek, and they were really fired up to try to prove that they, you know, are promotion contenders. They're obviously playing a team that's been top 4 all season. We were, you know, top of the league for 3 or 4 months at the start of the season. So I think they saw it as a really, really big opportunity to stake their promotion credentials. And the chances are, if Coventry get promoted this season, they will have to play us. So there's a good chance we'll have to play us to do so. So I think they saw that opportunity as well to kind of put a bit of a stake in the ground, market in the ground about their credentials. And, if we end up playing them in the playoffs, that game's going to be hanging over the Sunderland players because we looked like a team who, it's almost like a team on the beach. Like it looked like, I think you and Chris said it yesterday, it's like the last game of the season feel to it, where, we've finished mid-table, we can't go up, we can't go down, we're just playing the game out. And from the outset yesterday, like you saw, like the players just didn't look sharp, but it wasn't that they just didn't look sharp. Even in terms of where they were turning back rather than trying to attack. And you look, Kieron mentioned, had you right. I thought he was brilliant because he was so direct and so purposeful. And you listen to the Coventry stuff before the game. He's only just come back from injury. He played on Wednesday and he looked pretty unfit and lacking match practice. He was absolutely bang at it on Saturday. And that determination, that drive, I thought every Coventry player desperately wanted to win that game and show that they have a chance of going up. And I just thought we were completely off it. And, it's not something that we've been able to say about the Sunderland side, and thankfully so. I don't think we could ever accuse them this season of not lacking. We've had dodgy spells in games. We've had games that haven't been as good. We've struggled in front of goal at home recently. But to say that they just didn't want it or didn't look as if they wanted it, it's a big accusation. But it's true, and that's the first time really that you could say that this season.
See, I would just add to that, Martin, that because I think it can make a difference. It wouldn't necessarily be that they didn't want it, but they didn't want it anywhere near as much as Coventry. And of course, within football, within wider sport, often the pertinent question isn't, do you want it? Because that can be answered verbally. It's how much do you want it and what are you prepared to do in order to achieve it? And I mean, I don't think this could be anywhere significantly, classed as damaging. But I think that the benefits that could come from it, because you're right in what you're saying, it's very difficult over the course of this season to put forward the theory that Sunderland are lacking in effort or application. I don't believe that's the case. And you're right also insofar as, it is one of the worst things that, a player or a team can be accused of. And of course, I think there's probably been justification in citing that in the past regarding Sunderland, but not at this moment. But I think it would be potentially beneficial if Régis Le Bris made the players sit down and watch that game. And I know that's a cliche, but it's a wonderful demonstration in the little differences, in the little individual battles between two competing players about what are those little nuances that can be applied that, can have such a positive or a negative effect over the course of a game. And, when you think of Luca 9, if we all agree that Sunderland players generally give 100%, then why is it that Luca 9 gets a lot more credit in that respect than almost any other? And the reason for that quite often is that Luca 9's 100% is very visible.
Yeah.
And what Coventry had yesterday, certainly in terms of their 10 outfield players, because it's a much bit easier measure to look at, they had basically 10 Luca 9s doing their jobs and getting in and about it. Whereas it maybe even Luca 9 himself didn't look quite like the Luca 9 that, has grown so much since, back in against Charlton when he looked like a lost boy at the Stadium of Light. So it was a highly irregular performance in a whole host of ways, not only in terms of the individual and collective performance, but also the outcome, because this is not a side that over the course of this season has grown used to losing games by 3 goals. So I think, and I know some people might say that as an ex-player, you've been a little bit kind, but this was unusual. So the whole notion of just a bad day, a bad day at the office, as they say, I think could be applied.
I think it could, right? But it was something or two things that happened in the second half that I just thought we were getting overwhelmed by Coventry. And the two things were, I think it was 2-0, obviously, wasn't it? There was that sort of melee when we were defending the corner and Trey Humans, somebody had a bit of a tussle, and the Coventry players all went in and were, there was pushing and shoving, and they were bullying us. And then there was a tackle that Chris Rigg put in, which was, to me, a completely regular foul. It was a bit of an innocuous foul. It was a free kick, possibly a yellow. The Coventry players again surged on the referee, and they were bullying the Sunderland players. And we've seen it in pockets throughout the course of the season where we don't seem to be willing, and whether that's through experience or whether that's through how the manager is or whatever it is, but we don't seem willing to really stand up for ourselves on the pitch sometimes when there is adversity and when the other team's getting at us. And I just saw from the off, we were overwhelmed by Coventry through the play and then through how they behaved like as a human individually on the field. And I thought, if other teams are watching that to me showed a weakness that we need to address, whether that is experience on the field. And, Chris and I talked about it the other day, somebody like Roy Keane putting a tackle in or just grabbing somebody and, getting the team up and getting them as one, and we're going to fight for it. And I know, again, that's all cliched stuff, right? But you need that. It's you can see it. And you talk about Luke O'Nien getting credit, because he's obviously more visible sometimes in terms of his effort, but it's that sort of stuff that he often does that can bring the team together. And I just thought if you looked at those levels of Coventry and us yesterday, we were swamped by them, and it was mental as well as physical.
Yeah. I mean, it's hard to disagree with, and of course we probably shouldn't take anything away from Coventry and the more technical and creative side, because
they played well.
They did play well, and they're probably still benefiting from Frank Lampard coming in with new ideas and a new approach. And I think one of the advantages that you can have from bringing in a manager who had a stellar playing career is that there doesn't tend to be any significant time necessary for respect to be afforded to the new person. Now, some people would say rightly or wrongly, but even if we go back to the aforementioned Roy Keane, when he came to Sunderland, the one thing that he would have had as he walked in the changing room was respect. And he would have had that even although at that particular point he'd never ever coached or managed at any level, let alone first team level. And obviously Frank Lampard's career would allow him to have that type of respect. And then, of course, his coaching credentials would come to the fore much more and more as time went on. But I think looking back at the game for Roger Lebris and the players would be instructive in more ways than one, simply because I'm not saying what Coventry done yesterday redefines what 100% means. But 100% is certainly mental as well as physical. And it's not something that can exclusively be measured in just how far you've run and how many tackles you put in. But also, and this would be relevant given the league positions as they are, this is where Sunderland could potentially go for the first leg of the semi-final, because presently Sunderland are 4th and Coventry are 5th. And it would obviously give you a better understanding of what you potentially are going to face and the style of play that they have, because they're very, very much the informed team, beyond, certainly if amongst the people or the teams who could still make the playoffs. I would take for granted that Sunderland and Burnley or Sheffield United are going to be two of them.
Yeah.
And I think you're going to take Coventry, West Brom, maybe Borough, maybe Bristol City. But Coventry in that type of form, that type of mindset, that type of application will present a challenge. And in light of what we had, in light of what we seen yesterday, and of course it would be incumbent upon Frank Lampard. I believe that he would use that yesterday to not only empower and embolden the players if they come up against Sunderland again, but not simply at home. You know, he would try his best to make sure that the players can ignore the noise, the very literal noise at the Stadium of Light, to focus on the fact that this is players against players. And Coventry have shown that they can essentially dismantle Sunderland, you know, through what we've witnessed yesterday. So it's not pleasant to look at a game when things have gone particularly awry, but you know that's what happened yesterday. But thankfully, it's been the exception to the rule this season.
Yeah, and I think I was alarmed on Thursday when the manager did his press conference and was asked questions about the general tiredness of the group, about the international break coming up, and the fact that presents us with a chance to reset, which I think is true. We do need that. We do need that break. We do need that mental refocus on what's to come. But it told me that we weren't fully focused on the game at Coventry. We were kind of looking beyond Coventry, and we were looking directly at, you know, everything after it. And we saw that in the performance, because the performance was flat. It was, as Martin said, and as I said on the one me and Chris did yesterday, it was almost as though there was nothing to play for. The players were on the beach. It was the last game of the season. It had that feel about the performance where we know that these players have got levels that they can go to a lot further than what they displayed. And yet on the pitch, what we saw was a team who just kind of phoned it in a bit. And I don't know, that worried me. That was the mentality. I don't know, I might be wrong, but leading up to the game, particularly from the press conference, the appearance that I heard from Regis Labrie on Thursday, I just got the impression that the message to the group and externally was, we just have to get through this Coventry game, and then everything after that is the push for the playoffs.
I was on the BBC last week, and one of the issues that we were covering, and it wasn't unique to Sunderland, was the notion of managers at times trying to excuse performances through the team being tired. And I was labouring the point that a team cannot be tired. Individual players can. But, of course, I understand why it might be put forward, because if it refers to 7 or 8 players, it might be easier just to say the team. But the danger in citing this, and particularly citing it on an ongoing basis, is that some players will start to believe they're tired, or that they should be tired.
Yeah.
And, of course, any psychologist would impress upon you that once those ideas start to filter into the mind, it can sometimes be reflected in output. And I thought Regis Labrisse's post-match comments were relatively fair and honest insofar as he more or less says what we've been speaking about, that Coventry seem to have a little bit of extra desire in areas. But I really would doubt the wisdom of particularly using terms like tired and tiredness. Apart from anything, it's not PR friendly. You're not going to get a favourable response from the paying public when football players are described as being tired. You know, it's just not the appropriate terminology to use. But I think at this stage of the season, you know, and of course it is a longer season in the Premier League or many other counterparts across Europe, that referring to the notion of tiredness and fatigue, it isn't always going to produce benefits, particularly if you're reliant upon a nucleus of a squad, you know, to play most for some players, if not almost every single game. And I'm not saying that's what unfolded yesterday. I don't know if any players in post-match interviews alluded to it. But you can't speak about a team being tired or specific players being tired, and then 2 days later you pick them and they play 80 minutes or 90 minutes. Because you're sort of leaving yourself open to people then saying, well, why is someone else not playing in their place? And if you continue to play them, then in a sense, what you're saying is that player at 80% is better than the alternative at, like 90 or even 100%. So, he's got his own little challenges, and I don't want to be critical of him because I think he's done an exceptional job in the circumstances. But it might be a good thing now that there is the break and a chance to regroup and refocus. And a lot of those things are psychological as well. But it might give the players the opportunity to, get together, bond, and hopefully make that final push towards, the end of the season. And giving every game 100%, whilst also being mindful that they're in that unusual position that they can take for granted almost that they're going to be in the playoffs, and they can prepare for, the little different challenges that might come with that.
Just on that fatigue point, I think it's a really interesting thing for the Breeze to bring up, isn't it? Because there's been so much talk about, Joe Bellingham, Chris Rigg, other players looking tired and performing as if they do need a rest. And he's persevered, especially in midfield where you got people like Alexic who could come in for a game or for half an hour. Alan Brown came back in, and we had some experience as well as he's a good player. And it's almost it almost makes me wonder whether him talking about that publicly is a message to higher up rather than anything else. I wonder if it's a message about team selection, about lack of investment in January or lack of players coming in January. And it's kind of, not making excuses, but it's given context, wider context that he's maybe not directly able to control. Perhaps, we've seen before that managers kind of send messages in different directions in press conferences, don't we? So, there could be that element to it as well, potentially.
Yes, I mean, it's maybe not the most advantageous time for a manager to do it, given we're 6 weeks beyond the end of the January window, and obviously no remedial work can take place in that regard as a result. So I don't know. I don't know if it simply became a almost tailor-made excuse where you can evade responsibility. That personal responsibility as a manager or a head coach because things haven't went your way. But you're right in what you're saying, and I think especially for the teenage players in the team, because as much as they have an almost more natural enthusiasm to play football than most others, you do have to factor in that their bodies are physically developing still. And to that end, there may be challenges that wouldn't affect players who are more senior. So, yes, there are all manner of issues to contend with, but the psychological component can't be disregarded. And speaking about things publicly and speaking about things privately can have very different outcomes and, different benefits, you would hope. But, Reggie, I believe he's done exceptionally well, and he's done exceptionally well in light of what you're getting at, and that is that with respect to the highest echelons of the club and the people that make decisions in a financial context, there's a strong argument that Regis Lebris has done exceptionally well in spite of the support he's been given as opposed to because of it, because there's just no comparison between Sunderland's financial outlay and those that they're competing with, certainly in terms of automatic promotion. And
even Coventry, Kieron, when you look at what they've spent in recent years.
Yeah. I know, and without wishing to hark back to the events of last summer when so many managers were being linked, and no doubt some of them were approached. But when you look at Regis Lebris's career, both as a player and a manager, because him and Lorient had parted company, Sunderland were gradually moving towards, if they hadn't started, towards a manager that even at a personal level couldn't afford to say no to managing a club of Sunderland's standing and stature. And when you have a case like that, you're gradually then moving towards somebody that might not have been the first, second or third preferred candidate, but you know that it's somebody that isn't going to come to the negotiating table with a whole host of terms and conditions about their tenure. And then, of course, now, you might not get your ideal candidate or your first 3 or 4, but of course, that doesn't mean that things are going to turn out badly. And that's why I believe that Regis Lebris, he's coming to an environment he's got no familiarity with. He is restricted in terms of recruitment, certainly at a personal level. But, because we got to the end of the summer window and he was permitted to use his own experience to bring in Isidore, I think that earned him the right to do it likewise in January with Lefay. And, he could probably argue quite forcefully that 2 of the classiest players or the more productive players that he has in the entire squad are the players that he perhaps has had a significant input into in terms of bringing to the club because, he's got personal knowledge of them or worked with them. But I think for the powers that be, there's a very good argument that the team have performed exceptionally well and that for that financial outlay, the club are overachieving. Now, yes, that is a strong argument, but I also believe that there would be a validity in fans being exceptionally frustrated to the point of being very angry if we get to the end of the season and we narrowly miss out on automatic promotion, and it's perhaps perceived then that one of the reasons we've missed out is because they just wouldn't make that extra push or they wouldn't give that extra money to try and bring in more experience. Because they've performed, they performed so well for a, largely young group of players. But I suppose even when you look at, if we go all the way back to way before Christmas, even all the games that Sunderland have won, I think it's out with the Luton match at home. They've not won one game by more than 1 goal.
Yeah.
So a goal difference, of course, tends to be the last resort to divide teams in terms of league positions. But goal difference can sometimes be much more insightful than simply separating 2 teams who are level in points. And of course, Leeds and Burnley's are much more significant. And it'd be so annoying after 46 games for a group of players to get to the end of the season and know that maybe automatic promotion was there if a little bit of effort and a little bit more, and it's not even daring, but a little bit more financial commitment had been available to bring in reinforcements.
I think the counter argument to that is that you're in that position where promotion's a possibility because of everything that the club's done. So I think you can kind of give them credit for getting the squad so far. But I think in both last January and this January, and obviously that's, we brought in Lefay, which he would have cost a decent amount of money, and that was a big investment signing, wasn't it? But you kind of look and go, all we need is 2 or 3 quality, experienced players added to the squad, and we can really go for those promotion places. And the fact is, we haven't done that in both Januaries. And if we get to the summer and we haven't gone up, there's going to be a number of players departing, and they're almost going to have to regroup and not start again, but you're going to be buying 5 or 6, 7 first teamers in the summer because there'll have been 5 or 6 players leave, I suspect. So if we don't go up, we're going to be in a position where we have to or we were forced to sell a few, I think.
Well, it may be, and I know it might sound impressive to people to think about getting 15 or 20 million for Joe Bellingham or being able to bring in a significant sum for Chris Rigg, but it then begs the question as to what Sunderland are about, and what is their ambition in a short, medium and longer term. Because, in the last 2 to 3 seasons, Sunderland have sold arguably their most effective players in terms of Ross Stewart and latterly Jack Clark. And of course, there's nothing wrong with trying to run a financially sustainable business. And you're right, credit is owed towards, the people who are the decision makers, because they are putting up a very, very competitive showing over the course of the season. But I would still be very much of the view is that is the absolute least I would expect from Sunderland playing Championship football. And, the Championship and the monies that come into clubs on an individual basis isn't as reliant in terms of the percentages as what the Premier League would be. So the fan contribution is still hugely significant. And to that end, when you look at Sunderland being one of the lowest payers in the Championship, yet being amongst the highest every fortnight for home attendances, you do then tend to think, well, okay, we've now got to the third season in Championship football, after being in League One for 4 seasons. At what point do we try to act and demonstrate that we're arguably the leading light in the Championship? And can we then reflect that by making a show of strength? And for 4, 5, 6 windows, that has simply not been evident. So I think that, excuse me, I think that there's a potentially public trial in the summer for Kieron Brady in terms of how the fans view what his actual ambitions are, because you have to think that even if you're amongst the more patient types, at some point you're wondering, well, are we going to see something much more tangible, something much more significant in terms of bringing in players that might have greater experience in even, not necessarily Premier League players, but players that might have greater experience in bringing you to the Premier League? Because, we look across the team as it is at the moment of the squad of players, and, there's very little in terms of, having experience on a consistent basis at the highest level. So it's going to be a big summer, I think, irrespective of what happens between now and the end of the 46-game season, or now and the end of the playoffs. Because we've unfortunately seen, we only have to look at Leicester, Southampton and Ipswich. We only had to look last season at Burnley, Sheffield United and Luton having gone up. The gap between the elite and what lies below seems to be increasing, to the point that you're almost going to have to spend a lot of money to give yourself any chance of staying up.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that and pick your brains on it, because obviously we know you do a lot of work in the Premier League, and you see that difference, right? That gap between the Championship and the Premier League. You mentioned there, it's increasing. I think it was three years ago now when Forest, Fulham and Bournemouth got promoted, and they're all flying in the Premier League. But particularly in the case of Bournemouth and Forest, actually all three of them, but Forest are the one that sticks out to me, is that they spent an absolute fortune just to stay there. I mean, what would you say is the secret magic potion that all football clubs who get promoted need to take in order to stay there? Because, I mean, you're right. You look at that table, and Southampton were after a slow start last season, Southampton were fantastic in the Championship, and that just hasn't translated to the Premier League. So obviously the gap is massive now, but if Sunderland did get there somehow, what would they have to do to stay there, do you think?
Well, I mean, I suppose the one thing it would probably present for the PR arm of the club would be wonderful opportunities to almost on a weekly basis say that we've beaten or broken our previous transfer record, because that's at a bare minimum, so a £15 million signing to eclipse the Didier and Dong signing back almost a decade ago would be followed by an 18 million and then a 20 million, 25 million. Because if they didn't do that, then as much as you can laud what the players have produced over the last few seasons, particularly given their age, then they would just get, they would get beaten most weeks and they would get humiliated at times. And I don't wish to bring this back up, but it's just over 14 months ago that your nearest and dearest travelled 15 miles from down the road or up the road. And, what was evident that day was that there was just a difference in tempo and physicality and even desire. And, we'd probably experienced it, I think, the season before to a lesser extent in the games against Fulham, albeit, Sunderland performed well down there in the FA Cup. But at the very, very least, you're going to have to go out and attempt to sell Sunderland as a club that's moving forward and it isn't prepared to fluctuate as it has done in the past. But that's got the potential to be a hard sell. And it's probably less applicable to Leeds because they do have some experience. But whether it's Burnley or Sheffield United, that if they were one of the teams to go up along with Leeds, which I think is going to happen, for all they might end up with an impressive points tally for a Championship side. But Burnley and Sheffield United had much stronger teams than they do at the moment. And they got a lot of plaudits for the way I think it was Heckenbottom and latterly Chris Wilder and of course Vincent Kompany tried to play football. But there was a lot of their fans would tell you that their biggest mistake was trying to go toe-to-toe with teams that had better players and better technical outputs and creativity. And of course, Sunderland do try and play the game in a way that's easy on the eye, but they're just cleverer and quicker and more efficient. And you look at the chances yesterday, and of course anybody can miss a chance. But you look at Mayendas in the first half and not making a proper connection when I think it was Mundell had played it back into him. You look at Isidore. Isidore tends to score a lot of great goals that will live long in the memory. But you look at the chance he had yesterday and the decision making. He went to put his foot right through it, and it sort of like Sirkin to an extent in the first half. Now, of course, Premier League players miss chances, but they don't miss as many. And you could even make allowances for Sirkin or Isidore, mate. Saying you have to bring out something better from the goalkeeper. We're not asking you to score everyone, but it's just those little things that all add up over the course of a half or over the course of 90 minutes. And then, of course, over the course of a season. Southampton this season play lovely football, but, unfortunately, whether managers care to acknowledge it or not, there's maybe far too many of them not necessarily thinking they're Guardiola, but thinking that they can get something from their players that mimic what Manchester City have been so good at. And ultimately, whatever strategy, formation or approach you have, it's the quality of the players that tends to determine, how things transpire.
How big do you think that gap's got, Kieron? Because, if I look back to that 89-90 season that you were part of the Sunderland team that finished sixth, went up through the playoffs, that season in Division 1, we went toe-to-toe with most teams. We didn't look, obviously we ended up getting relegated on the last day of the season, but, we didn't look too much out of place in that division. On our good days, we beat Man United at home. We had some good days, and we were very close to staying up, and that was a team that finished sixth in only its second season back in the second tier after coming up from the third. And the gap didn't seem as big then as it does now.
Yeah, I mean, you're right, man. But I mean, I suppose, this was in a time before parachute payments and such incredible sums of money.
TV money, yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, I think what the increasing revenue in terms of television has done is that it has to some extent negated the notion of a big club, insofar as there was a report released a couple of years ago which said that at that particular time, 9 or 10 Premier League clubs could break even in a financial sense without any supporters coming into the stadium. And that, of course, was just another indication of the very high percentage of revenue that comes from television. Now, of course, that wouldn't be applicable to Sunderland, and it certainly wouldn't be applicable to Sunderland playing Championship football, where the fan contribution still has got such an important part to play. But the thing now about an established Premier League club is that it doesn't mean that it's a big club by any stretch of the imagination. For all Bournemouth had a season out, or other clubs have had like a Fulham or Leeds perhaps now having 2 out, having been back for a few. That if you're a club that's run well, that shouldn't have too adversarial effects, because you're going to benefit from parachute payments. Then you might be back in amongst the bigger monies. But of course, Sunderland and parachute payments is but a distant memory, because they've had to take an extended break, as it were, from the elite, and to that end it increases the challenge. And of course Luton, perhaps tried to spend big for a club like Luton because they got to the Premier League. It didn't work, and they're now paying a pretty heavy cost for it. But all of those considerations aside, I think in respect of the fan base, of course, when you go to football matches, you want your team to win. But you both of you so know well that if they were to get promoted, then you can leave all of those issues for another day. The anticipation of the summer, the fixtures being released, looking to see when they are going to come to the stadium and when you're going to go to St. All of those things are, they're worth the, what might lie ahead. And all of the promoted clubs will have very painful memories of taking sore ones from the established elite. But that's football. It's part of the reason we love it and are so drawn towards it.
Well, Kieron, we're going to have to grab you back, I think, before the playoffs come around and get more of this, because it's been fantastic. I've really enjoyed it. Thank you very, very much for joining us. It's been brilliant.
Thank
really
you very
insightful.
much. Thank you very much for asking.
No problem at all, mate. Well, like I say, we'll get Kieron back. I'm sure everyone listening.
Oh, sorry, but could I just ask Gav and Martin, of course, because of your pride in coming from the region, am I right in assuming that both of you will be adorned in black and white for the cup final later today? I'll take that laugh as a no.
Absolutely not
no,
a chance.
No. I'm hoping it's a completely joyless 5-0 defeat. First goal goes a minute in, so that they don't enjoy any of it. And I hope all the trains get cancelled coming home, just to make it even worse for them. So, but by the time this goes out, we might know the result. So, we'll see.
As someone who grew up in Glasgow, I can appreciate tribalism more than most. So I understand where you're coming from.
Are you going to add something there, Martin? Are you ready to chime in?
I was just going to say, if that happens, then it really rounds off a shit weekend, doesn't it?
Yeah.
I was thinking that also, but
yeah. Well, thank you very much, Kieron. Like I say, we'll try and get you back on before the playoffs. I think if we do get there, we'll see. Thank you to the listeners for joining us. We've got lots coming up this week with regards to the international break. I mean, we've got loads of time between now and the next game, so we'll have a few more interviews with ex-players and managers, hopefully, and bits and pieces here and there. Martin will be back at some point, won't you, mate? So thank you very much for joining us. Cheers again, Kieron. Cheers to the listeners. We'll catch you on the next one.
This podcast is part of the Sports Social Podcast Network.